This has been our location for the broadcast this morning, and we've now walked right inside the museum to the exhibition side of things, and a very, I suppose one could call it a beautiful depiction of Mandela while he was on Robben Island. Nothing beautiful about the actual sort of a task at hand that he was doing, but certainly the actual depiction and the idea of what was going on and how grueling life was on Robben Island being depicted here in this particular statue that we have got here in this room. And this is what all these different rooms are all about. And this was actually opened, this museum, in 2000. It was opened in the year 2000, on the 11th of February 2000, by Madiba himself. And that was basically at the anniversary of the release from prison of Nelson Mandela in 1990. So you'll see some of the different rooms, and this is a beautiful photograph. And if I have to say, a magnificent photograph of Winnie Madikizela Mandela in Soweto, and of course her home there, and her face just sort of just beauty. That's all I can say when it comes to that. But these are some beautiful photographs, and after 27 years in prison, Nelson Mandela still made jokes, and he came out determined to bring peace and democracy to South Africa. He had no time for vengeance and bitterness, and that's one of the quotes that I'm reading on the walls that are depicted here. Here's another photograph, of course, the very, not photograph, it's a statue, the very famous one, Madiba always lifting his hands and bringing that apartheid regime to the negotiating table was always Mandela's guiding objective. And he made it very clear that he regarded the armed struggle as a tactic and not a principle in itself. So in 1961, it was Mandela who persuaded the ANC alliance to accept the armed struggle, yet almost 30 years later, it was Mandela who had the vision of and courage to push for negotiations. And these are just some of the excerpts that I'm reading to you as we move along through the different rooms and the different exhibitions. And you see here with former President F.W. de Klerk and the two of them together, of course, you know, both of them receiving that Nobel Peace Prize, and different leaders that he met through his years as president. And then, of course, just a room dedicated to some of the visuals of him talking and sharing some of his ideas and the portraits of him at different ages and stages of his life. So this is just one section of this museum that is absolutely beautiful. I've had the time to actually go through some of the archives as well, and those archives are absolutely beautiful. I mean, things and gifts from all over the world. And I was lucky enough to have Ndileka Mandela, his granddaughter, taking me through some of those archives, and here she is. Look what my prize is as I walked all the way through the different rooms to find you standing here. It's so wonderful to see you, and happy birthday for your grandfather on this day. I mean, the 18th of July, a big day around the world.
Yes, thank you, Leanne, and good morning to the listeners. I mean, 10 years on, can you believe it?
Wow.
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
I can't
yeah,
actually.
yeah.
I can't. I mean, 10 years, a big gaping hole in our lives, and most definitely in the country, because there's some moments that, I mean, I think many South Africans would ask, what would Madiba say? What would he say at this time? What would he say?
Well, he'd be disappointed and heartbroken at the level of poverty and the level of unemployment, especially amongst the youth. Those are things that, you know, he related to, they were very close to his heart. And it would pain him that, you know, when they came out of prison, you know, they said that children must go back to school. They've gone back to school. They've attained their degrees. They have no jobs. So it would really pain him.
And that's the reality, is that a lot of people are feeling, you know, as much as a day like this comes around and you want to remember the good, because there is so much good to remember. But when you try in your brain to remember the good, but in your stomach you are starving, it's very hard to see the good in everything. And that I think is the problem. And I'm getting that sense from a lot of people on social media and a lot of people talking about the events that are happening today. We need to believe in the legacy, but the legacy was meant to change and change for the better. But it doesn't feel like we're here. Where did we go wrong?
I think, Leanne, the starting point would be for me that, you know, we were meant to have continuous TRC. I say that because you see the level of violence that we see right now and the level of despondency among people, and, you know, the underpinning thing of poverty and unemployment is violence. And we also come from a very violent history. And the first one was fine, but it's not fine in terms of rooting out the level of violence. I mean, if you see what's happening of people being shot in broad daylight, of people, I mean, we live in like a gangster's paradise. And I think we veered off because we also did not have if you look at countries like China, they have 50-year plans. I think our dream was deferred because of a lot of things that have not happened. Yes, the first building block was freedom because the slogan of Granddad and his comrades was freedom in our time. The next building block should have been economic freedom, which we haven't seen. And therein is a challenge because a lot of people, you can't ask people to be hopeful when they're hungry. Because if you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the basic needs is shelter, food, and employment, which is at the bottom. You can't have a person to say they need to have a vision, which is the third eye, at the top of the hierarchy when they are still starving.
And that's the problem, is that as much as people, and it's not one looks towards your grandfather and believes we see good, we see the hope, we see everything that was positive about this country, and then we juxtapose that to where we find ourselves right now. The corruption, the things that are going blatantly wrong within the top government levels of the country, whereas the money that should be used for the betterment of the people is being used for the betterment of individuals. And these are the kind of things you don't want to be speaking about on such an auspicious occasion, an occasion that the United Nations has declared Nelson Mandela Day, International Nelson Mandela Day, to do good. And yet, these are the things we're talking about. I suppose it's not really a bad thing, because that is what your grandfather, I imagine, had always said, that when things start going wrong, something needs to change, and we need to address that.
Yes, we definitely do, and we can't always defer everything to government, and where is the private sector? Where is the robust civil society? If you look at the period before our democracy, we had a robust civil society in the form of the UDF, which was an amalgamation of a lot of civil society under one umbrella. So that UDF was the vanguard of society in terms of their needs. We need to go back to the drawing board of saying, okay, now we need to have a very strong and robust civil organization movement, because that's what brought us to our democratic dispensation. The biggest mistake that we did as a people is to say, now that we have our own government, let us relax. Therein is a mistake. That's the biggest mistake we did. If we can go back to civil society, because civil society works at grassroots level, and it also cuts across all strata of society, that's where we need to go. Back to civil society movement, yeah.
And that is something that a lot of people are doing. And listen, enjoy the day, because I know that from here there's activities happening at schools, coming back for the statue unveiling here, and then the big one is in Qunu. You'll be following the whole day?
Yes, I will be following the whole day. I mean, for me, it's the pinnacle of today is Qunu, because that speaks to who my grandfather was. He was a Tembu man. And I mean, if we remember, Leanne, when he made his speech at the docks, he was dressed in traditional regalia, and when they were being sentenced, that was him asserting in a court that was not of his peers, that he was being judged as a Tembu man. He was claiming back his identity. That's what the statue in Qunu means to me.
And that I cannot wait to see, because the one we've sort of got a little glimpse of behind bubble wrap is the one where he's a statesman and the later life of Nelson Mandela. But going back to Qunu, and that's going to be unveiled a bit later, is the young version. And I'm sure, as you are excited, many of us as well are really looking forward to seeing that one. Thank you, Ndileka Mandela, granddaughter of Nelson Mandela, just talking to us a little bit about how he would be viewing South Africa at this point, but also the significance of this very important international day on the calendar around the world.